Ladies and gentlemen, can I please have your attention?
Great Scott! There's no crying in baseball!
You better hold on tight, Spider Monkey.
This is where the fun begins.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. That's right, we're ranking Spider-Man No Way Home. Spider-Man No Way Home is a 2021 American superhero film based on the Marvel Comics character Spider-Man. It is the third Spider-Man movie in the MCU and ties in two previous Spider-Man series. It is the 27th film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and in the film, Peter Parker seeks Doctor Strange's help to restore his secret identity. But a spell gone wrong unleashes villains from across the multiverse, forcing him to make heartbreaking sacrifices to set things right. You know, I watched this movie when it came out, and I honestly remember being fairly disappointed, so it was pretty interesting going back and watching this movie and finding out that, honestly, I have a much different opinion than when I first watched it. Let's get into it with the 10 essential aspects of a movie. First is plot. Does the movie follow a comprehensive story arc and is plausible within the world that has been created? You know, this is probably going to be a fairly long video because this movie is very dense. There's a lot going on, a lot to talk about. As the plot goes, there are two really big plots in this movie. There's the first half of this movie and there is the last half of this movie, and they somewhat go together. Now, the first half of this movie, honestly, I did not enjoy very much. I thought it was very typical MCU garbage, just not very entertaining. The story is not very entertaining. The only reason you're even invested in watching anymore is because of Spider-Man, but really it's not that good. The last half of this movie is where the plot gets way better and way more interesting. Now, the reason I think it works in this movie is they're taking a grand idea, the big idea of a multiverse, something that has to be written well, but honestly has somewhat of a bad rap, but it is an interesting idea if you can write it well, and they're combining it with the small reality of Spider-Man. I think Spider-Man is a superhero that most people enjoy because he feels a little more relatable, because all of his problems have to do with Peter Parker in New York City. It's not about the world, it's not about the universe at stake. It's just most of the time either New York City or Peter Parker. It's about him and his girlfriend, him and his job, him and his school. All the things that people can relate with because they deal with problems with those things as well. I think they do a good job with combining this grand idea of the multiverse and the cool ideas that come with such a big idea and using it in the small, relatable world of Spider-Man. I think that's what makes this plot really, really good. Another thing that they did in the last half of this movie that I really enjoyed is that they cranked up the seriousness. Marvel kind of falls off, in my opinion, because they went from serious tones with some comedy to having a comedy movie with some serious tones. And the first half of this movie is a comedy with some seriousness, and it's not very good. It's not very entertaining. It's not even very funny. And then the last half of this movie, they take and crank up the seriousness, and the story is really interesting because it's serious and the characters are taking it that way with moments of comedy. But because the comedy is so far and few between, it's written better and it fits better, so it's actually more funny. And I thought it came together really well towards the last half of this movie. Now, I would prefer it to be the last half of this movie than the first half. I think that makes it a little bit easier to remember the movie at whole when the ending is satisfying and not just the beginning. But the beginning plot is honestly very boring, but the last half of this movie is amazing. Second is attraction. Does the movie have an interesting premise with a high entertainment value? This is a hard thing for me to judge because this is a Spider-Man movie made for Spider-Man fans, and the previous movies that are associated with this one, I knew all about them. I was raised on them. I watched them as a kid, so it's kind of hard for me to think about watching this movie without knowing that previous information. I think this movie is not going to be nearly as good without knowing that information, but if you do know it, if you have seen the previous Spider-Man, or you just know a lot about superheroes and enjoy superheroes, you're going to have a really good time with this movie. I don't know how much kids will love it. I'm sure they just enjoy it the same way they enjoy every other Spider-Man movie, but as an adult, I think if you can watch the previous Spider-Man before watching this one, you're really going to grasp on what they were going for here. Third is theme. What message or truth is a movie trying to convey? The messages in this movie are the same messages that are in every Spider-Man movie. There's a message about responsibility. The old great line, with great power comes great responsibility. There's ideas about sacrifice here. Peter Parker always has to face the problem of wanting to be Peter Parker and Spider-Man, but you can't be both. You gotta sacrifice something somewhere to be one of them. And this movie kind of has a touch on the idea of redemption and how Spider-Man figures out how to deal with some of the mistakes that he has made. I think they're all really great. I think they're really personable. I think that's what makes Spider-Man so gripping to people, makes him a superhero that stands out because people feel related to him because he has a lot of the same problems that we all have during regular life. Not quite the same. I mean, we're not going around saving New York City, but I just think his problems feel real. They feel like problems that everyone's dealt with, rather than, Superman, who's got to go save the world by spinning around so fast he reverses the whole entire world. Just that stuff's not relatable. But Spider-Man has these problems where he has to learn responsibility and sacrifice, and we all have to do that at some point in our life. And I just think it's a good message. It's one that stands out for a reason. Fourth is dialogue. Is there a real feel to the conversations? The first half of this movie, no, it was terrible. There's a lot of comedy that is not funny. It's not that enjoyable. It's a part of Marvel that I just really don't enjoy. The last half of this movie, when things get real serious, the dialogue gets much better. It gets much more gripping, and the conversations feel like they have much more weight. Fifth is acting. Are the characters convincing? Now we'll start off with the big guy, Tom Holland as Spider-Man. I think most people agree that he is probably the best Spider-Man as far as looks, the size, the way he just feels like Spider-Man, the way he's supposed to be. He seems really young. He's good at being funny. I think he's actually a really good actor, and I think that his movies have kind of been haven't been able to show that from him because they're MCU movies and they haven't been good at making them really dramatic or serious, and he can't really show that off until this movie. I think this is the movie that he actually got a chance to show that he can be more than just the silly, funny Spider-Man that has some banter. He also has an emotional range to his acting because he is a decent actor. There's some emotional scenes in this movie that I think he does a really good job. He commands the role to be the guy in the center of the screen. I think he deserves it. I think he's a really good Spider-Man. If I had to choose one to represent Spider-Man, I think he honestly is the best representation. Now, speaking of other Spider-Men, we're going to talk about Andrew Garfield. And he's the one I've seen the least about. And honestly, I feel like he is somewhat the worst Spider-Man. I think he is a good actor. I think he does a good job with what he can because he's just good at his job. I don't really feel like he's Spider-Man, though. He does what he can, but he doesn't look like Spider-Man. He's not how I picture Spider-Man. But he's nice to have on screen. He is funny. He does his best with what he's got. I just think he wasn't the best choice for Spider-Man, but he's a good actor. Now, last we have Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man. Now, this is a Spider-Man I grew up with, and I'm a Batman fan. I like Batman because it's such a serious tone to it. I don't like the wham bam pow Batman. I like Christopher Nolan's Batman. I like true dark Batman, and I think Tobey Maguire was kind of that kind of Spider-Man. He had a story that felt really serious. It wasn't the typical Spider-Man. Spider-Man's supposed to be really funny and lighthearted. There's not really a whole lot. There's depth to Spider-Man, but for the most part, he's funny. I felt like Tobey Maguire's was constantly in anguish. It was always just, there was something going wrong in his life in some big way, and he was going through it emotionally. I like him as Spider-Man. I think his movies are really what elevate him as Spider-Man. He kind of looked old then, but it really fits in this role for this movie. I really like him as an older Spider-Man, but honestly, he is one of my favorites. He's one of my favorites because of the fact that I grew up with him as Spider-Man. Now, I will mention Alfred Molina as Otto Octavius. He does a really good job in this movie of just picking up from where he left off. He honestly is a really good casting as Otto Octavius. I think he just fits that character really well. I think appearance-wise, tone-wise, the way he talks is just perfect. He does a really good job playing this character, and he went from, it's like he never stepped off from being that character. It's like he never did anything else, because when he comes into this movie, he is exactly the same as he was in Spider-Man 2. And it's awesome to see. It really helps put you into the movie and feel like what's going on is really happening, that this guy just got pulled from that second movie and thrown into this universe. It doesn't seem like it had been years since he had done this role. It felt like he did it yesterday and he was just ready to go again. I just think he was a really good casting. Lastly, I will talk about William Dafoe as the Green Goblin, talking again about perfect castings. That guy had made the Green Goblin. I think Green Goblin is honestly kind of a somewhat weak villain. I don't think he's that interesting. I don't think he has that much going for him. But William Dafoe gives him a lot of depth, and he has some really good acting. He does a great job with the two sides of the story, with having normal and then Green Goblin. I just think he does a good job of switching that up. He lets you know with his face and with his tone that he is a different person, and you really feel it. And he feels like the leader of this villainous army. He feels like he's the strongest one, the most evil. He just does a really good job with this role. It was a perfect casting. 6 is cinematography. Is there a creative use of lighting, setting, and wardrobe to convey emotion? Now, having the multiverse aspect in this movie really helps with the cinematography, because there's a lot to look at and it's all very interesting to look at. There's a ton of characters in this movie. They all have their different designs. Some of them are redesigned from the other movies. It's just very fun to look at, especially if you are a superhero nerd and you love looking at all these heroes and villains. Then you're gonna have a great time. You're gonna see a lot of things. It's super interesting having the 3 different Spider-Men and all the different suits and the way that they use their web and the way that they fight. There's a lot of depth going on because this movie has a ton going on for it. One of the things I loved about this movie is that the action sequences are good. I feel like Spider-Man movies always do have good action sequences. He's a fun character to watch fight because he's so agile, and the way he uses his web is always such an interesting way that I feel like I never think about if I had that ability. I feel like I would be terrible because he's so quick to react on things, and it's always fun to watch him fight. So having 3 of them on screen fighting all of these villains, it's extremely satisfying to watch. But they also do a good job of giving them each their own time. They each have their own sequences. They don't feel like cameos that have been thrown in. They all work together, and they do a good job of showing them all fighting their own way. But that connection between all 3 of them and the seriousness that goes on for the last half of this movie is what really helps on the emotional side to this movie. When you're not taking yourself serious, it's really hard for the audience to take the story serious. So the fact that they did really tone it up and just focus in on the actual serious concept of the fact that all these villains exist and they're evil and they want to do things. There's a ton of moments in this movie that will pull at your heartstrings. Now, if you haven't watched the previous Spider-Man, there's going to be a couple moments that you are missing. But honestly, even without those, there are a couple scenes that happen in this movie that they are trying to get you emotional, and I think it works fairly well. There's only so far you can go with these movies, but I think they do a really good job. Now, if you had seen the previous Spider-Man movies, then there are going to be a couple moments that feel important to the previous Spider-Man's character arcs, and I really enjoyed that. I think it's a depth that Marvel movies are just missing, but when they actually tap into that, make it serious, and have actual consequential things happen to characters that you really enjoy, it gets you emotional, and it's present in this movie, and it kind of makes me sad that not more Marvel movies are like this, because when they do it right, it's amazing. 7th is editing. This is all about the pace of the movie. The movie is 2 hours and 28 minutes long. You know what you're getting in for. This is a big plot with a lot going on, and you know that when you're going into it. So honestly, the 2 hours and 28 minutes was fine. It didn't bother me at all. In fact, I didn't even realize it was as long as it was because I was having a good time watching the movie. They could have made it 20 minutes longer, and I don't know if I really would have noticed all that much. 8th is soundtrack. Now, the soundtrack is good. It's that typical superhero soundtrack. I think they do a good job with the emotional scenes. There's some music in there that helps. It helps with the emotion and pull you along, but it's not a soundtrack that you're going to be bragging about. You're not going to be talking about, "Oh, did you hear the music from Spider-Man No Way Home? It was awesome." It's very typical, but it does help in this movie because there are emotional scenes that the music will help carry along the emotions you're supposed to feel. 9th is directing. Now I feel the director is in charge of the previous 8 aspects. They're the ones that have to put it all together, give it their stamp of approval, and make a good movie. The director of this movie is John Watts, and this was his 5th movie. The 5 total movies that he's directed to this point were Clown, Cop Car, Spider-Man Homecoming, Spider-Man Far From Home, and finally Spider-Man No Way Home. Now, I haven't seen any of his movies outside of the Spider-Man franchise, but I'm really glad that they kept to a single director for the Spider-Man franchise. It just really helps feel like there's a cohesive character development throughout all of the movies, and he does a good job of elevating this movie above the others. This one feels like it has more of a weight going on, and it really feels like a Spider-Man movie. I think he's a good director. I'm really glad that he kind of went away from the Marvel typical boring movies in the first half, and in the second half of this movie really saves it. He was able to tap in to that emotional side of the movie, so I'm curious what else he's going to come out with. I hope he kind of keeps to that serious tone. 10th is time. Will it stand the test of time? I think it will definitely stand out if you're a Spider-Man fan. If you're a Spider-Man fan, this is the movie that brings it all together. It's got a little bit of everything that you love about Spider-Man and a ton of villains. So I feel like this is the movie that's going to stand out among Spider-Man fans. But if you're just a superhero fan, I don't know how much is going to stand out. And if you don't care for superheroes, I don't think it will stand out really much at all. But myself, as a Spider-Man fan, this one definitely stands out. It's the one that I am going to consider pulling out and watching again amongst all of the Spider-Man movies that have been made. Now for the review section. Rotten Tomatoes critics gives it a 93. The audience gives it a 97. And IMDb gives it an 82. Now I could understand giving it an 82 if you're not a Spider-Man fan. If you didn't watch the previous movies, if you're not really into superheroes, then I think this movie does have good aspects to it, but there's the first half of it that's not very good, and if you can't appreciate the second half for the fan service, then yeah, you're probably not going to think it's a bad movie, but you're probably not going to think it's a great movie. However, I did watch the previous ones. I do like Spider-Man, so I think I am most agreeant with the 93. I think 93 is where this movie belongs. The first half of it is not that great. The second half is amazing, so I gotta punish it a little bit for that first half when we're comparing it to every movie that's ever been made. I think it's got a lot of great things going for it, but it does have some bad things that are just going to keep it out of that A+ range, but I think it's a solid A to A-. Finally, for the rankings. For the year of 2021, I only have 2 total movies, so on the entertainment side, it's going to be first above Space Jam: A New Legacy. These are not even close. This is such an easy ranking for me. I had to claw my way through Space Jam: A New Legacy. If I wasn't doing this channel, I would have never finished that movie. I would have never watched it. It just was not good at all. Spider-Man No Way Home is a great movie. I will buy it and I will watch it many times over again. Now, cinematically, it is going to be first above Space Jam: A New Legacy as well. Again, just two movies on 2 totally different planes of existence. One is a really good movie with a lot of great things going for it. The other one is a movie that never should have been made in the first place. Now, for the decade of the 2020s, I have 42 total movies, and on the entertainment side, it is going to be 7th, just below Trap and above Deadpool and Wolverine. Now, I have it above Deadpool and Wolverine. I like that movie a lot for Deadpool, not so much for Wolverine, though I can enjoy Wolverine in some sense. I just really enjoy Deadpool. I think he's a very entertaining character. That movie is somewhat limited, but it is just a good time. However, I think Spider-Man No Way Home, it just has like a special place for me because it has some childhood memories in there. I think it's a really good story. I'm a sucker for cinematography, so I enjoy a lot of the action in that movie more than Deadpool and Wolverine. So honestly, it's not that hard of a decision. The thing that really limits Spider-Man No Way Home, and the reason it's below Trap, is the runtime. It is a long movie. It's a long haul. You're going to have to sit down and get invested into this movie. And as when entertainment comes, so there's movies that are shorter and I'm just as invested. I don't have to take up as much of my time. I think that deserves some credit. Like a movie like Trap and the ones above it are movies that I can watch and are fairly short and really entertaining, just as entertaining as Spider-Man, but just on an easier time scale to watch and fit into my day. I just think that does entertainment a little bit better. Now, out of 42 movies on the cinematic side, it is going to be second, just below The Wild Robot and above Wicked. Now, I have it above Wicked. These are two movies that have a lot going for them. I think No Way Home has a really cool world, a lot of interesting characters, some good action. There's just a lot going on. The same goes for Wicked. There's a lot of interesting characters. The world is great. It's fun to look at. However, Spider-Man No Way Home has an emotional side for me that Wicked just does not. I did not feel really any emotion with Wicked. I just don't think the character development is as good. I also don't love musicals, and that just kind of tones it down for me. I don't think that that movie gives you a whole lot of time to enjoy the characters enough or make them feel real enough for you to be invested emotionally. Where Spider-Man No Way Home kind of has the benefit of previous movies helping you be invested in characters already that are going to come into the movie and add to a character that you've been invested in for the previous two movies. So there's just a lot going on to help support Spider-Man No Way Home and put some emotion behind it. But I do have it below The Wild Robot, and I think The Wild Robot's emotional side is just on another level. They're both creative and interesting, but The Wild Robot's emotional side comes from the situation, not necessarily the characters. And I think that represents film better because you're always going to be emotional at the situation because it will also mean something different to you every single time. You can associate whatever makes you emotional in that movie with something in real life, and that will always make you emotional. I love that as you get older, I think you're going to find different aspects of this movie emotional. I just think that's really good film writing. I think that represents film in an amazing way because you're just so invested into a movie that you can connect it to your own life and it will always make you emotional. Spider-Man No Way Home is emotional because of the characters, and though that is good and that's why it's second, there's a lot of good aspects to that. I just don't think it represents film nearly as well as The Wild Robot, where it can do it every single time and give you something different every time you watch it as you get older. There's just a difference there in how well that is written and how well it represents film. Now, all time, out of 55 total movies on the entertainment side, it is going to be 13th, just below Trap and above Deadpool and Wolverine. It is there for the exact same reasons as the decades. Now, for cinematography, out of 55 total movies, it is going to be second, again below The Wild Robot and above Wicked. It's there for the exact same reasons as in the decades. Alright, that's all I've got for Spider-Man No Way Home. Watching it again, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's just I've gotten older or I just was watching it a little bit more keenly this time, but I loved the second half of this movie. I really was invested in it. It's a good time. It's fun to watch, but it's also way more emotional than I remember. I enjoyed a lot of it. Let me know in the comments how you felt about it. Were you disappointed when you first watched it? Have you watched it again? Has it gotten better? Has it gotten worse? Let me know your opinion. I love when you guys comment. That's the whole reason I made this channel, is to interact with you guys. So I love hearing your opinions. What is your favorite Spider-Man movie? Who is the best Spider-Man? Just let me know what you think. If you're interested in someone who does the exact same format as me, go check out my best friend Bosso Movie Reviews. He does the same thing where he ranks it against the movies that came out in the same year, decade, and all time, except he doesn't do entertainment cinematography. He does one list, and he is much different than I am. He has a different opinion, and he has a lot more movies and a lot different movies. So if you're interested in someone who has a different opinion but does the same format, go check him out. But make sure you comment on movies so that I can review that movie. Subscribe so that you can watch when I do review that movie. But otherwise, that's all I have. I'm Mr. Majoritarian. Stay classy, San Diego.